A big part of cognitive support is the proactive conversation. Proactive conversations are how we talk with the person that we're supporting about how we can address certain behaviors or situations. We use the conversation to help them practice problem-solving skills and to make a plan for what we want to try in the future in order to avoid the behavior. Many programs already out there talk about having these kinds of conversations, but they're frequently geared toward people who don't have developmental disabilities or conditions. The act of simply having this kind of plan-making conversation takes a lot of cognitive skills. Throughout this video, you'll see a bunch of skills that are listed with a number. That number is the skill number found on the Organ Behavior Consultation Cognitive Skills list. You can find a link to this list at the description below. Let's take a look at just a few of the skills that it takes to have a conversation about behavior if we weren't providing cognitive support. During the conversation, you're expecting the person to not only express their thoughts, but to understand what you're saying in real time. In my opinion, this is where many conversations fail. You expect the person's brain to be able to problem solve internally or abstractly, which is another cognitive skill. If you're talking about a sensitive subject, you're expecting the person to emotionally regulate, a third skill. If they suggest something that doesn't quite work and you adjust it to something that does work, you're expecting them to be able to consider and visualize your alternative suggestion abstractly. After you agree to a plan, you're expecting the person to hold that plan in their mind however long it takes until the time comes to use the plan. You're expecting that in the moment of them needing to use the plan, the person will bring it up in their minds. And finally, you're expecting that they will be able to regulate themselves in the moment so that they can follow the plan. These are a lot of expectations when it comes to cognitive skills for anyone, but especially somebody who struggles with these skills in their day-to-day life. For people with FASD, the two major skills previously mentioned that you're almost certainly going to see challenges with are processing the conversation, we call this receptive communication, and remembering the plan when the time comes to use it. This is called short and long-term memory. In this video, I won't be addressing the second issue, but in future videos, I will discuss ways that you can prompt somebody's brain to use a previously agreed to plan. In this video, I'm going to give you some tips to provide cognitive support for the person while you're having the conversation so that that conversation can be most effective. This will help specifically with the major issue of receptive communication, but as you'll see, the suggestions actually provide many additional cognitive supports. Understanding and processing what's being said is a daily struggle for most people with FASD and for many others with various other developmental disabilities. Things can get confusing for us as caregivers because while it may be a challenge for the person to process what's being said, talking often isn't. So you're having an interaction with someone who may actually talk just as well as you, but when you match back the speed and vocabulary level, the processing isn't happening. Honestly, the issue of receptive communication is big and fascinating, but I want to get to the suggestions that you can immediately start using to help not only with proactive conversations, but also in making everyday conversation better. Firstly, you want to pick a time and place where you and the person can be alone without any distractions. This may seem obvious, but in everyday life where we're juggling everything we need to do, sometimes we just want to go for it with all the distractions around and make it work. One of the challenges with FASD is that the person frequently gives us social cues and responses like nodding or saying uh-huh, even though the processing isn't happening. This usually isn't intentional, but rather a coping skill they've learned in order to fit in with everyday conversations. And when they do this, it tricks our brains as caregivers to continue to talk to them more and more, even though we should be doing the opposite. The environment has to be free from other auditory noises, especially talking. This can be other people's conversations or even talking on the TV. Verbal conversation can be tough enough. Having more than one person talking at once will decrease the person's receptive abilities further. Secondly, when possible, use visuals. Sometimes when I'm talking with clients, I have a piece of scratch paper that lays on the table where I write key words of the conversation. Clients frequently look down at what I'm writing, and when they see the keywords, it can help them to remember the main points of what they're trying to say. With FASD, memory goes quickly, and these keywords can help them remember the points that they were trying to make that otherwise would have been lost. Perhaps lost while they were processing what I'm saying when it's my turn to talk, or maybe that were lost while they were making a different point. As you start to come up with different options to move forward with a plan to prevent a behavior, write those down as well. If the person can't read, you may need to use pictures. Write down the options and give the visual to the person. By having all of the options in visual form, it takes a load off their brain so they don't have to abstractly think about all these options, and they can go back and forth at their leisure and make a decision about which plan they want to try. Thirdly, slow down and give time to process. Allowing people with FASD to process what's being said is probably the number one thing I observe caregivers forgetting to do or not doing because they don't know how to practically do it. Oftentimes, the person we're supporting has had so much practice at maintaining a normal conversation pace while not even processing that they're the ones who keep the conversation going back and forth way too quickly. When I'm having a proactive conversation with clients, I say things like, "Don't answer right away, I just want you to think about this first." And then I make my point using as few words as I can. By asking the person to process first, it allows them to think rather than try and keep the conversation going at a normal pace. You may need to say, "Can you think about this even if you know the answer?" to help clients who struggle with really thinking their answers through. 4. Repeat first, rephrase second. In any conversation we're having where we don't feel like the person that we're talking to understands a point, our response is usually to rephrase it in a simpler way. For people with receptive communication issues, this may actually make things more difficult because now they have to process the sentence all over again. So if you get the sense that the person isn't processing, repeat what you said exactly the same way. Then, if they still don't understand, rephrase in a simpler way. The fifth thing to keep in mind is, depending on the situation and the person, you can let them know what you're going to be talking about ahead of time so that they have more time to think. It's all about slowing down. Likewise, you may need to split up the proactive conversation if the person would benefit from thinking about potential solutions by themselves or over a long period of time. You may say something like, "After dinner, I'd like to talk to you about getting to the bus on time in the mornings. Can you think about some ways that we can make that happen?" Even if the person doesn't really think about it in great detail between the time you prompt them and the time you have the conversation, it can help them transition into the actual conversation later because they already know what you're going to be talking about. So again, these strategies are to help you provide cognitive support for someone when you're having a proactive conversation with them. They especially help with the cognitive skills of receptive communication, planning, and working memory. Next week's video, we'll talk more about the structure of the proactive conversation and give you tips on what to include in it. Cognitive support videos are posted every Wednesday. You can subscribe to this channel by clicking on the subscribe button below, and you can like Organ Behavior Consultation's Facebook page at the link below. Thanks for watching.